Hello everybody. Let's talk about teams. What do you think? When we talk about teams, I've re-altered the way the lectures are arrayed for this course. I put the three team associated lectures up front. I thought under our virtual environment this might be a better way to go. It also allows us to begin to learn about teams and use our teams as an object of analysis to make real maybe some of this theoretical kind of ideology as opposed to in line with our actual experience. So, teams and teamwork, the theme for right now for the 21st century. And we're well into the 21st century, or a fifth of the way through the 21st century, if you will. Imagine that most of you will live to see, quite conceivably, the 22nd century. So, what's a team? Let's start there. It's a small group with complementary skills who hold themselves accountable for a common purpose, goals, and approach. That's a great place to start, right? And I'll be honest, when my advisor, Pete Ditto at University of Irvine, asked me, well, Mark, you want to go to graduate school? What do you want to study? And I really want to study team dynamics, small group behavior. And he said, wow, that's going to be hard to find because not many people study small group behavior. Not many people study team performance. Why not? Well, think about it. If we study individuals in the laboratory and we have a 2x2 design, we know we want 20 people in each condition, that's 4 conditions, we need 80 participants. What if you want to study a 2x2 design using teams of 5 members? Well, think about that. We had 80 participants in an individual-based experiment. In teams, we need then 20, right? We need 400 people. So team research is expensive to do. So there should be a lot more done, but I think the cost of doing team research often makes researchers kind of take a different approach, not involve themselves in that paradigm to the same degree. We need to know a lot more about teams, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, than we actually do at this point. But we have experience, and we can also use that. So, evolution of a work group to a team, leadership becomes a shared activity. And notice that why I love that Bay City, Michigan, that Pat Kerrigan video. Tom Peters goes in and he says, I expected to go to these places and I expected to see 3 or 4 leaders, and what did I find? Much to my surprise, 1,000 leaders. And effective management shares leadership with the people who are closest to the process. So leadership becomes a shared activity in successful organizations. Accountability shifts from strictly individual to both individual and collective. So notice, isn't that an interesting contrast? That is, yes, I need to be responsible and accountable for my portion of the project, but I'm also a member, and the entire project then, the team needs to be accountable. So accountability is operating at 2 levels. The group develops its own purpose or mission, and most teams should develop a mission statement right off the bat, right? And it should be aligned with a set of values. Notice our first exercise was really about that, to kind of guide you guys and understand where you're all coming from within your team. Problem solving becomes a way of life, not just a part-time activity. And effective use of teams, then people learn to generate hypotheses, they learn how to test the hypotheses, and they learn how to make decisions based on the empirical evidence generated by that hypothesis testing. It becomes a way of doing business rather than just a temporary add-on or feature. Right? Effectiveness is measured by the group's collective outcomes and products. So we look at the team as a collective that produces collectively. Right? I love participating in the psychology department at Ohio State. We lectures, we meet, now on a weekly basis. And on the one hand, how I perform in my courses is extremely important to me. But it's important to me who the department hires and how we represent ourselves as a team of instructors for especially our psychology majors. Now, for everyone, I'm not beating up on the non-psychology majors, but people who want to devote themselves to psychology and take this huge number of courses in psychology, how are we doing as a department to meet your needs, right? That's tremendously important. So, and that's the product we deliver. I'm going to talk about 4 types of teams here. Notice there can be some overlap, fuzzy boundaries. Please allow for that. But just to get a general sense of what teams might do, how their roles operate, there might be advice teams. We used to collect and transmit knowledge to facilitate managerial decisions. So these people might do survey research. They might do needs assessment. Remember needs assessment? They might be responsible for developing that to see if there is a need, right, and the nature of that need. Now, production teams are teams that carry on day-to-day activities. Most of the teams that I've been associated with through my many work years, my 25 years of working before I made a foray into college and academia, right? I was participating in production teams. That we just produce a product over that period of time. Now, one important aspect that managers within an organization, and especially upper managers, should coordinate the activity of various teams. So we begin to look at what we will call internal and external customer relationships. At the lumber mill, when I worked at the lumber mill, our lumber mill, what we did is remanufacture lumber. So we took big pieces of lumber, and from that we produced smaller pieces of lumber, and we would put the finish on that lumber. We would operate the planer. We did the drying of the lumber. So to take kind of raw timber, that's what the lumber mill does. And the raw logs come into the lumber mill, and it's made into kind of large pieces of rough dimensional lumber, right? Like 4x12s, 2x12s, up to 20, 30 feet long. Our remanufacturing process was then to take those big pieces, often cut them in half, thickness-wise, dry that lumber after stacking it appropriately so it will dry it to a certain level, run it through a planer so it's like finished lumber that you would buy at Home Depot. Notice then, we've got the lumber mill feeding the remanufacturing mill, who is feeding the shipping departments, who is eventually feeding the customers. But those first 3 are internal, external customer relationship, internal customer and supplier relationships. Okay. So we think in terms of internal customers, that is, we're supplying a product to someone in the organization who's an internal customer of mine. Okay. Now, project teams or problem-solving creativity can be highly specialized and technical. I participated in one of these teams semester before last here at Ohio State for kind of this certificate process that they want to use to sell more courses within arts and science. So we were to suggest various pairings of classes, right, to entice you guys to take those classes, thus spend more money in art and sciences, and then we give you these little degree certificates added into your transcript. Does it sound like I was really on board? Let's never mind there and not go there. But what it was to develop how this would be done. So that it was a project team, right? And notice that once we got that done, we disbanded. Production teams are probably continuous throughout your career. The project teams come in, get it done, and then disband, and we move on with our lives. Action teams have a high level of skills and high coordination. Many operate with the greatest level of autonomy and decision-making authority of all the teams. So these are people who charge usually with high-level tasks, right, but have the autonomy to get them done of their own volition. Now, these might be also known as implementation teams. You might hear that team as well. The research has been done. How it's going to be done has already been decided. Now it's up to this group to actually make it happen. Or as one of my bosses used to quote Jean-Luc Picard, this is one of Pete Muleveld's quotes. He used to love that show, and he would tell me, make it so, right? So he expected me to carry out the implementation. Now, what do effective work teams look like? Well, they exist in team-friendly organizations. If the organization ain't team-friendly, setting up teams is just ridiculous. It's just an exercise in hypocrisy, and it's just going to piss people off, right? Individual team members demonstrate teamwork competencies. So, teamwork competencies can be socio-emotional, and they can be instrumental. A little more on that here in a couple minutes. Teams understand missions and boundaries. What is it that we're to do, right? And can we confine ourselves to doing that, and what are our boundaries? Let's not reinvent the wheel if we're a team that works on making treads. Know your limits, Teams possess requisite training and resources. So where training is deficient, training needs to be brought to the team to get people up to speed. Resources to get the job done are required as well. So what is team effectiveness then maybe measured as? Well, we can look at performance. That one's pretty straightforward. What was the expectation for the team, right? The team achieves the desired goals within the constraints. So teams given this limitations, and if, let's say that psychology, now that arts and sciences, the whole university is saying, oh, we have to have massive budget cuts, right? So someone is going to tell psychology, look, you got to reduce your budget from anywhere from 7 to 15%, right? Will the teams that are in charge of making that happen meet the performance goal? Will they actually demonstrate that budget reduction? Right? So that's kind of, or we might need to increase output by 10%, over the next 6 months, whatever it is. Now, viability is about the likelihood that the team will survive, that the team will live, right? That the team will persist. And components that feed to viability, right? Members are satisfied with their roles on the team. Are people happy with what they're doing? Are they satisfied with their role? Is the team satisfied, and this is a level up, with their role within the organization? Does it make sense, and are they contributing? Members are willing to continue to contribute their efforts to the team. And to the extent that team members start to fall off, they start to miss meetings, they start to not participate, they stop meeting their deadlines, then we see that the team is becoming, the viability of the team is under threat. And either a leader needs to step in and make some corrections, or the team is likely to just disband and perhaps in failure. What are some team threats to team effectiveness? Well, unrealistic expectations is the big killer, right? That is, we expect more from the team than they are capable of delivering, and maybe we've asked them to do too much, right? Or we've asked them to do something over which they have little control or little ability to investigate. So unrealistic expectations, what happens to the team members? It leads to frustration and anger. And I want to ask you, what kind of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be a leader that people like to interact with, and the result of your leadership is a sense of increased self-efficacy and increased self-esteem in your team members? This is the massive responsibility to leaders, is your people developers, your people enhancers, your family enhancers, your community enhancers as a result of your efforts. If people feel good about their role on a team, they feel effective, they feel that they're learning, they feel that they're growing, right? There's only positive benefits that can accrue from this. So to do the opposite then leads people down a path to anger or frustration, and they won't participate in the future. They go home and they take it out on their families. They talk smack about the organization. There's no good that comes from this, right? So be aware of how people are, what they're gaining from the team experience. Are they experiencing lower self-efficacy, like they believe they can't get this done? Then you have to step in and do something about that as a leader, right? And you guys are Buckeyes, and you got leadership, kind of written on your life program there. So I want you to get with it, and I want you to consider that all the time. Right? How about lack of resources or poor planning? Did you provide resources for people? And if you need to do the planning, did you do it effectively, or did you require your team members to submit plans to you that you reviewed and then met with them and discussed, right? So that the plans are solid. Are the assignments vague, or is the team improperly staffed? And this is going to be demotivating. Is there a lack of training? And if there is, then supply the training they need. Find out what it is you want them to do, what they'll have to then know to be able to do that, and then measure whether they have that or not, and provide it in the absence of them having it. Right? And a lack of training, and also opening the door to experimentation. Lack of trust or lack of real empowerment. We say, oh, you're empowered, but generally that's not the case in organizations. There's a general formula, and most of us are suffering that now. We were just told in the psychology department, well, you're just going to have to do more with less. And it's like, awesome, let me give you a big FU to that. That's just exploiting me. Do more with less, and they say, well, that's a mantra. We're a lean organization. You're going to have to do more with less. And I say, bull pucky to that one, right? And they're saying, well, you're empowered, I want you to be empowered. But really what they're doing is they're giving you more responsibility, but they're not providing any additional resource or authority. And ultimately, that's just going to be demotivating. We'll talk about empowerment in a subsequent lecture, but most people give this lip service and are not honest about it whatsoever in organizations. Let's talk about a couple team problems. Take on too much too soon. The expectations are too high. That is, start slow, incrementally. Remember, the longest journey begins, you got it, with a single step. So, be methodical in the approach of developing the team, a step at a time. Lack of resources resulting in frustration. We don't want to frustrate people. There's no gain in frustrating people. Internal conflicts are left unresolved. If there's internal conflicts, then we got to bring them to the table, and we got to resolve them. Now, what this means is we have to learn how to do this for the most part. And this is another kind of what we'll call soft skills training, communication training, right? Dispute resolution training. Result rather than process orientation. I think it's better to focus on the process first, and then we'll let the results take care of themselves. And we'll see when you read Mary Walton's book on the Deming management method, it's all about system, it's all about process. You continue to improve the process, the outcome can't help but improve, right? But if you sit there and just measure the outcome, and that's as far as you go, you measure the outcome, all you do is reject those that don't fit spec, right, and retain what does. But you never change the ratio of in-spec to out-of-spec. And that could be customer service calls, that could be the length of a sheet of paper, that could be an automobile bumper. It really doesn't matter. Focus on the process that's creating the finished product. And I'm going to talk about a lot of tools in this course that enable us to do that. But we're going to get tight with Deming, and he's going to explain it better than anyone can. Now, it could be interpersonal skill problems that are interfering with our process, right? It could be lack of flexibility and or persistence. So these are things that can be worked on. Almost all of this can be ameliorated by effective training, right? And that's, when I took my degree, when I was working on my degree at Boise Cascade, and they were willing to pay 75%, but remember, what are you going to study? Well, you're not going to study art history for a paper mill. And I studied organizational communication, that was my major, and training and development was my minor, right? So it's to learn how to train people to become more effective and learn how to train ourselves, right? So characteristics of effective teamwork, this is just a laundry list. I won't belabor it. You can go down this list. You can see, though, that the different elements, and when you're working in your team, to what extent are you demonstrating these to your team members, right? And to what extent are you explaining your need for these as well? How do you communicate that? So these become all important, right? Look down at the bottom, second to last, self-assessment and introspection is super critical. Ask the question, how am I doing? And then once you ask the question, how am I doing, then back it up with the other question, how do I know? Right? Remember Tom Peters, what do you think? And then my addition to Tom Peters is, how do you know? Right? So always those introspective questions. Now, 3 components then to effective teamwork. We got to inspire and we got to maintain cooperation, right? Not competition. There's no place for competition within the team. When it's all said and done, and when I retire, right, I already got my plan for my retirement. I'm going to start writing the books. I got like 3, 4, 5 books in me. Been thinking about for most of my life. This is the most recent book that's come to mind, though, is The Competition Myth. And I'm going to maintain that there is no study that's ever demonstrated the superiority of competition to cooperation in producing a product, all else being equal. And I know a lot of people want to argue with me about this, and that's cool. This is why I want to write the book, because I think it's kind of frickin' radical, and that appeals to me as well. But I believe it, and I don't think there's any empirical evidence to support at all the efficacy of competition over cooperation. Regardless, let's not go too far with that, because that's my opinion, and I'll sell it in the book. So trust, remember, one will be putting oneself out there. So you're going to be doing new things on a team. You might have disagreements. This is tough for people, right? So you got to have trust to allow you to be yourself, right, and open up within the team environment. And then there's cohesiveness. And we gains importance relative to me. And I'm going to share a story with you, and it's one of the most embarrassing moments in my life. I was working at the lumber mill, and we had a new boss, and his name was John Woods, if you'll believe that. What's the odds of a lumber mill manager be called John Woods? But never mind. Anyway, they gave me a new guy to work with, and this guy was not up to the task. He continued to make mistakes. It was costing us a lot of production. And then I got the boss yelling in my ear, because I'm the one who's ultimately responsible for the production off the sticking machine, the lumber stacking machine. And he brought me into the office, and he says, Guillermo doesn't want to work with you anymore. And I said, why does not Guillermo not want to? And then he said, well, because you blew up at him the other day. And he described the situation as Guillermo had described it to him, and I said, that's true. And then I went on to explain it, and I said, I did this, and I'm trying to do this, and I did this, and do you get there? You get where John Woods is going to go? He looked right at me and he said, Mark, you just gave me a 5-minute explanation, and the only word I ever heard out of your mouth is I. And I'm like, I really don't like this guy. I don't like John Woods. He doesn't like me, but I have to accept the fact that this son of a bitch is right. I sounded like a conceited, narcissistic asshole. And it really changed my approach and my perception of myself at that point in time. So I'll thank John Woods for that little conversation. I needed to be thinking in terms of we and us, and I wasn't. I was purely in the I mode, and it was embarrassing, and